thank you. So people are back from the tea break without the tea because the tea got delayed. So we'll serve the tea while we are listening to you. Thank you, Emily and Sherry, for joining us for this session for the benefit of participants. Just to say that, and I'll speak in Hindi for 2-3 minutes. तो IFAD के प्रोजेक्ट्स कॉर्पोरेट कमिटमेंट्स होते हैं कि हम कुछ विषय ऐसे हैं जिनको हम थ्रू आउट प्रोजेक्ट इम्प्लीमेंटेशन उनको इंटीग्रेट करेंगे, मेन स्ट्रीम करेंगे. हाँ, दीज रिलेट टू जेंडर, दे रिलेट टू न्यूट्रिशन, यूथ एंड क्लाइमेट फाइनेंसिंग. और अभी एक नया टॉपिक पे भी थोड़ा काम हो रहा है, विच इज डिसेबिलिटी इंक्लूजन. ये प्रोजेक्ट इज क्लासिफाइड फॉर it ticks the box for nutrition and for youth, and of course climate financing है कुछ. Even though it is not ticked for being gender transformative, but gender mainstreaming पे काम है. तो अभी के जो सेशन है, these sessions will be conducted by my colleagues Sherry and Emily, who will take us through IFAD's corporate policy on all these themes, and also how we should implement them during how we should integrate them during the implementation of the project. So over to you, ladies, to take the discussion further.
Thank you so much, Meera. I will now hand over to Emily, please.
Okay, thanks everyone. And I have to apologize. I don't know why my camera won't go on, but it doesn't seem to let me put it on. But I can see you in the room. And so let me share the PowerPoint. Okay, so first of all, just to introduce myself, really, and thanks for inviting me to speak today. It's really lovely to get to learn a bit more about your project. So my name is Emily Wylde. I am quite new to IFAD. I joined in July, and I'm part of I'm actually based in Abidjan in the regional office, but I have a global role, so which is nice to get to see a bit of context. And so I'm a senior technical specialist on targeting and social inclusion, sitting in the gender team. And yeah, so if we can go ahead and get started. Can you see my screen? Is it sharing?
Yes, it is. Maybe you want to make it full screen.
Yes, it is. Oh, yes. Thank you. Okay, so you already know your project quite well. So this today we're focusing really on things related to mainstreaming, as I think the introduction just said, and targeting. But so just to take everybody back to these bigger questions about why is mainstreaming environment and climate, gender, nutrition, and youth, why is it even important just globally? And part of this is just we know that climate change will push more than 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2030. This is all related to the big picture, achieving the SDGs and the challenges that are involved with this, and particularly the stability of the food supply, decreasing with these more and more extreme weather events that disrupt food chains. And so we know that vulnerable people will be most affected by this, and we need to build resilience. And we knew all this even before the past few years with the pandemic, and obviously everything that's happened has just exacerbated all of this, adding more shocks. in terms of the environment, the biodiversity loss and land degradation, really altering nature, and specifically for these small farmers that we're most focused on. And so half of all land is affected by soil degradation globally, and certainly in India, we know this is an issue as well. In terms of youth, is such a big group. Nearly 800 million youth live in rural, semi-rural, and peri-urban areas, where we know agriculture is a key employer and a growth driver, but also struggling to keep these youth engaged and providing enough work for them. And so youth are 3 times more likely than adults to be unemployed. And also with youth, it's important to think not just of actual unemployment, which can sometimes be more apparent in urban areas, but underemployment. So they have some activities, but it's not really enough to keep them busy. It's not enough of a job for them, and so pushing them to try and migrate, but often distress migration. We know that obesity is on the rise, but at the same time, other forms of malnutrition are still very prevalent. And in many places, people, nearly 1.6 million people are depending on forests, including 70 million indigenous people. And then for women, we know they make up 43% of the agricultural labor force, but the plots that they manage tend to be 20 to 30% less productive than the plots managed by men, and there are lots of reasons for this. And we know that if they had the same access to productive resources as men do, they could increase their yields by 20 to 30% and lifting total agricultural output by 2.5 to 4%, and lifting 100 to 150 million people out of hunger. So clearly, women's exclusion and marginalization is important for them, and it's an issue in and of themselves, and we need to work on women's empowerment and economic empowerment, but it's also important for everybody. So that's the big picture. But then within IFAD, what do we mean by mainstreaming? And it comes down to we're blending these specific perspectives, so related to environment and climate, gender, nutrition, and youth, really into the DNA of the country programs. And the idea is that this is not something, these aren't things that are tick boxes or just add-ins at the side, but really applying this horizontal approach to have this higher degree of integration and synergy across the themes, because we know they're also interrelated. But this will also depend on the specific nature of the project, which will require more focus than other ones. So in terms of IFAD's commitment in the current replenishment round, so we're in IFAD 12, which goes from 2022 to 2024, and there's some targets globally to achieve, and that is that at design, 35% of projects are gender transformative, 60% are nutrition sensitive, 60% are youth sensitive, 10 projects focus on the needs of indigenous people, and 5 on people with disabilities. And so as a percentage of the program of loans and grants, 40% should be climate focused and 90% should build adaptive capacity. So these are really quite ambitious targets at the global level. And then these need to be translated down into individual projects, so that at completion, across all of the projects, we want to see 60% of them with gender successfully mainstream. So that's getting a project rating of 5 or higher, and at least 90 getting 4 or higher. So this is just setting the standards, the sort of minimum standards around gender mainstreaming. Similarly, for climate change, 90% need to be rated 4+, and environment and natural resources management, 90+. So again, quite ambitious, and these are where it's not just about the design on paper, but really how things get translated into implementation and access on the ground. So in terms of the project, now we've been able to have a look a bit at the design documents to start filling some of this in, but I know many of you will have even more ideas on some of these things and could fill this in even better. But the project context, you know, there is definitely looking at all of these mainstreaming themes. And so on the climate side, just the fact that this is focusing on mainly rain-fed dependent farming, and at the same time for these farmers who are incredibly exposed to all of these changes in climate and environmental degradation, where droughts and floods are expected to increase, both in terms of the frequency, how often they occur, but also their intensity. You know, and we're seeing this around the world more and more. And we know in your areas, this is also a really big risk for these farmers, and this has been taken account in the project. So for nutrition, it's nice to see that nutrition indicators are above the national averages. So that's great achievement for the state. But, you know, these are obviously still major issues with stunting prevalence at 33% and wasting at 20%. These are really still quite high. And micronutrient deficiency is a major contributor both for child and maternal malnutrition. And so for food security in general, still a major concern, with nearly half of household incomes going towards food. And this really is very high. It's showing how little room to maneuver households have in their income, and how high these needs are around food. With respect to gender, there's really large gaps in earning between men and women, and gaps in labor force participation, you know, so how many women are actually participating in the labor markets, and then when they do, how much they earn. And interwoven with this is really a lot of these issues related to the high domestic care burdens. And this is also made even more acute by the high levels of male out migration. And in some cases, there might be remittances coming back, but actually women's care burdens, particularly when their male family members leave, just often become even greater, because they're now having to take on not just all the household duties, but all the more duty in the field with fewer household members to help. For those households that are eligible for NREGA, they're often having to also do the labor for that. So it's really compounding these burdens for them. And this really just constricts what they can then do in terms of their opportunities. And then also in terms of social norms, you know, prevalence of domestic violence is really quite high, at 14% of women having reported either physical or sexual violence. And this is obviously just the number that is reported, and we would expect the actual number to be much higher. So there's a lot of regressive practices, but also sort of social norms and attitudes underlying this that need to be addressed. And then finally, for youth, you know, really high levels of youth migration. I think it was around also around 14% of underemployment youth, 14% youth unemployment in especially in urban areas and hill regions, but as I said, underemployment and lack of opportunities and skills is really a key issue facing them, and just their options. So how the project has integrated the mainstreaming themes on climate. the whole approach to this cluster-based production, focusing on volume, high value, environmentally sustainable and climate resistant value chains. So it's really putting climate right in the middle of how these value chains are even understood, and these climate smart agriculture practices and training and extension services offered to farmers, LCFBO leaders, and measures for efficient use of water and energy conservation. So climate is woven through. We also see with nutrition, there's this, again, in the value chain, the nutrition sensitive value chain promoted through crop diversification. Well, some of the crop diversification programs, nutritional literacy component in those districts and blocks where malnutrition is high, and supplying this highly nutritious, ready to eat foods, sorry, typo there, through the ICDS scheme, and scaling that up. And it's also important to note that the ICDS scheme and that integration is important for nutrition, but it's also really important from the gender perspective, because these, having childcare options for women with young children who are below the school age, there's still those women who have children under 3 whose children wouldn't yet be able to participate in those schemes. But for the ones who are between 3 and school age, that is also a really important aspect related to their care burden. So in gender, in terms of bullet points, it doesn't look like much, but actually these are quite big things around having a gender and social inclusion strategy, incorporating some aspects of labor saving technologies, and then self-help groups. So these, just taking this this approach, there's a lot underneath there that could be unpacked, but it's obviously woven through in quite important ways. And then for youth, this focus on skills training, incubation, financial services, and then apprenticeships for these returnee youth in particular. So we really see the way that these are pulled through and how they also relate to each other. So for example, youth and gender and nutrition are also related to climate, in terms of how effective these climate smart agriculture practices are, the better that households, farms are able to adapt and deal with these climate changes, the more food security will be improved, etc. And the more production, the more likelihood that youth will be able to be engaged in their local areas, etc. So it's really important to see these, although we've separated them here into blocks, to actually really think about the way that these are integrated together. So I think if we have time, I was wondering if this might be a chance to, there's a reality check. There's always this moment between what's on paper, and the startup session is a good time to start thinking about this, where you need to do this reality check between this great design document that's been approved and all the thought that's gone into it. But some time has passed inevitably between when it was written and now actually having to start putting things on the ground. And so this time for a reality check, just to start thinking through some of these questions. And so I wondered if it might be good just to take 1 or 2 minutes, maybe just do like a flash group work with 1 or 2 people sitting next to you, just to think through some of these questions. So, around firstly relevance, is the project design still relevant to the context? Did the context relative to the mainstreaming themes change between design and now? If so, are there any changes that need to be incorporated? So for example, in the socio-political scenario, do project targets consider the project context in terms of the mainstreaming themes? How are these well related to each other, or are there ways that that could be even further improved? What mainstreaming themes does the project focus on? Yeah, I wonder, would this be a good time just to take maybe 2-3 minutes of a quick round to just sit with the person next to you and think through some of these things, or would that be a bit too complicated in terms of the way the room is set up?
Yeah, hi. I think no major changes have happened as such, as I could see. And I think whatever have been kept in the design, that is still intact and very much relevant to the project.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, then maybe if there's nothing yet on this one, then it's just to keep that in everybody's minds for, as the project goes on, to keep coming back to some of these questions and these reality checks, because things will probably change over time, even more. But so we can then carry on with, go ahead. Sorry, I can't see you and the slide at the same time.
आगे run
पीपीटी वही चला रहे वही चला रहे
Was that a question coming through?
No specific, nothing specific. We can go ahead with the PPT.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so in terms of the targets with respect to the mainstreaming themes, what we could pull out is on environment and climate. There's, in terms of the log frame, there's this indicator of adoption of environmentally sustainable and climate resilient technologies and practices, and the number who have been trained in climate adaptive production practices and technologies, with an end target of 400,000 households. On gender, there's this overarching target around 60% of total beneficiaries being women, but also in a nice way, many, if not all of the targets are actually sex disaggregated, which is a really good practice to actually look across all of them in terms of how they women and men will participate differently and what the outcomes will be for them. So that's a great thing to have in there. For nutrition, I couldn't actually find any specific targets in this. I might have missed any. And then for youth, that 35% of total beneficiaries would be young people. So now in terms of the who, and I'll play this video on targeting, and I'm gonna hope that it works. Sharon, I'm having some difficulty with this one. Do you think, would you be able to display on your screen?
I'm gonna try it, please. Give me 1 second, Italy.
Apologies for that.
I just shared you the link in the chat box. It takes you to the YouTube link. Maybe if you just click on that, it plays.
Okay, then I'm gonna have to stop sharing. Sorry everyone, this is always the challenge with sometimes doing these things remotely. Oops. Oh, that did not
So what happens when your children take over your account?
IFAD is the only international financial institution with a specific mandate to reduce rural poverty through investments in agriculture and rural communities, home to millions of smallholder farmers, most of them poor. IFAD has committed to improve its targeting performance to enhance its contribution to the 2030 Agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, and in line with the Leave No One Behind principle. IFAD defines targeting as the set actions and
Do you want me to try it, Emily?
specific groups of poor people.
Oh, is it not working?
Many
Sorry,
It's working.
initiatives it supports. At this
It was working, why did you stop it?
Oh,
So,
sorry, I'm just hearing it. Sorry to interrupt.
Emily, it was working and we were paying attention to it, so can you complete that one?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah, sorry.
same time, diminishing the risk that the less poor will benefit disproportionately if that mandate defines its target group as rural people living in poverty and experiencing food insecurity in developing countries. Within this front group, IFAD's comparative advantage lies in targeting the poorest, poor, the vulnerable peoples, and those who are most likely to have little access to opportunities due to social exclusion and marginalization. Targeting is one of IFAD's principles of engagement, and therefore cuts across the delivery of all its development results. IFAD targeting policy outlines the principles and methods that guide IFAD in identifying and reaching the target group. This policy is a unique feature of the organization and lies at the heart of its identity, values, and institutional DNA. IFAD has revised its operational guidelines on targeting to improve its delivery on the targeting policy. The innovative features of the guidelines are clarity on IFAD target group, poorest, poor and vulnerable rural people, and those who were more likely to be left behind, definition, and prioritization of criteria for geographic targeting, stepwise approach to targeting along the program cycle, from country strategy to project's completion. Features of a robust poverty analysis, pathways out of poverty, with an emphasis on graduation pathways that empower the poorest to overcome poverty. Strong focus on participation and accountability, a participatory and learning-oriented monitoring and evaluation framework with indicators disaggregated by socioeconomic profiles. Mainstreaming gender, youth, nutrition, environmental, and climate issues in the targeting process, recognizing the dynamic nature of poverty and the importance of tackling the multiple forms of vulnerability, aligning targeting with government poverty reduction priorities, policies, and strategies, ensuring that working with relatively better off stakeholders results in direct benefits for the poorest, testing innovative targeting approaches with the support of partnerships, adopting consultative and participatory approaches to targeting, and empowering and building the capacity of those who have less of a voice.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So, actually, if I go back here, this is basically there's quite a lot in that video around targeting, and I think there's a few key things that I would just emphasize as well that it's really about thinking not just about targeting at the beginning of the process in terms of which beneficiaries are included, but really throughout, and to also think of it in quite a holistic way, in that it's not just about the criteria that are set for targeting in terms of eligibility, in terms of what characteristics for each of the different groups that are included, but also
Really recognizing that a lot of targeting happens sort of inadvertently or by people not being able to participate. And this is down to then project components that might not be made or designed in a way that really meet their needs or recognize their constraints. So targeting goes just beyond eligibility, and it includes all aspects around design, and then really around outreach on the ground, and who is included and how they're included, and what are the ways that they can participate. So I would just, for those key messages at this point, is really thinking quite broadly about inclusion and really thinking about making sure that no one is left behind in this. So of those target groups that you're trying to reach, really make sure that it's not just the easy ones to incorporate that get pulled into the program, but really also those people who are a bit harder to reach, and what would it take to reach them, given the way that your project has been designed. So here we can just again pull from some of the design elements, but so in terms of who is it targeting, there's small farmers, but there's within that a few categories, and the design documents do a nice job of being a bit more specific around this. So extreme poor and poor households are the main focus, with some, ideally not more than 20% more from the commercially oriented side of those who are a bit better off. But then there's also a specific focus on those who are the ultra poor, and obviously they have even more distinct needs. But in terms of the challenges around including these groups, I think for the extreme poor, and also the ultra poor, I should have added a bit more there. I think ultimately these are similar challenges. They just are of different degrees. And so this list is not fully comprehensive. I would encourage everyone to continue to think about it. And I think we have some time actually in this session now to feed into this a bit more. But so for the ultra poor, the extreme poor, and the poor, some of the biggest challenges really are around their barriers to participation. And so some of this is that they tend to be very risk averse. And this is because they have such high immediate consumption needs. When you need cash today, you tend to do things that will guarantee that. And it's a lot harder to participate in things that require you to wait a bit, to wait to get paid, or wait to see a return on your investment. And so that drives sometimes people self-excluding from programs if they feel that they're too risky, or that they're not going to have what they need in the short term. And so it's being really aware of that. And their burdens, for those immediate consumption needs, they have high work burdens, in the moment. And so these are some of the biggest challenges for these groups, but they also have a lot of, the flip side, of course, is opportunities, and it often can come just fairly simply from taking this really people-centered approach and using a participatory approach, and really just asking them about what their constraints are, and designing lots of aspects of the program around what their needs are. So in terms of where they need to participate in trainings or meetings at the community level, even at startup, thinking about where those are held and what time those are held and what kind of who will be able to participate in those in their own way. And then for more intensive components, whether it's around again, trainings or any extension services or whatever, just being aware that especially the poorer the household, the more these other burdens they're going to have to carry at the same time. And they're going to have to balance all of this. And the easier that a project can make it for them to balance all of their considerations, the more likely they are to be able to participate and the more inclusive the targeting will be. And so staying on the farmers, the ones that are a bit different here are perhaps around the more commercially oriented farmers. And here I think the challenge is more around the risk of elite capture and just being mindful about, who is participating, and making sure, because they tend to be easier to incorporate, that they don't inadvertently take over more than what the project is envisioning for them. But at the same time, in terms of opportunities, it's often important to get their buy-in and support at the community level, for the overall success of the project, and also its sort of political appeal at the local level. That can be important in and of itself, but they can also have a demonstration effect and a leadership role, which can be tapped into in positive ways. So it's not only a challenge, I think, where those better off households are concerned. There's definitely opportunities there, but with all of this, it's just a matter of considering it in a sensitive way and understanding at the community level. And I'm sure many of you have many years of experience of doing this already. When it comes to women, one of the big challenges is, of course, around their care burdens, their lack of assets, and their lack of voice and control. So this is around whether they are able to participate at all. So, are they included? And then if they are included, how much they can benefit. And so there's lots of opportunities there to be gender transformative. And as I think was mentioned in the opening, even without explicitly saying this has gender transformative aspects incorporated in, I think the orientation of it already is in that mode, and it's working in that direction. And there's small things that could be done to really address this in terms of the way that trainings are offered, addressing social norms in some of the content. And so there's a lot of opportunity there as well, to make sure that women are included, but not just included in terms of the numbers and whether the targets are being met, but also just really in terms of their empowerment and the results that are achieved for them, and making sure that they're able to get as much out of it as possible. And then for young people, this is it's also a challenge for them in the same way as it is for including the poor in general. Including poorer young people is generally going to take a bit more work, because they have more immediate needs. They might need to work on the side. So they might not be able to participate in a full-time training that's far from their house, for example, if they also need to work and contribute to the family. So it's really thinking about, for those poorer young people, how do you meet them where they are, and really design around their lives? And it might be more modular approaches rather than, trainings that take up longer amounts of time. Just being, considerate of their needs and their constraints. I think the more that happens, the more you're able to include poor young people, rather than those who are a bit better off and whose families, they can spare them for some time to do some trainings, or they're not quite as dependent on their daily wage labor in the way that poorer households are. So just really be mindful about this whole time. It's just this question of, okay, within these categories, who really is participating and who is able to attend, and at the same time, who who is left out? Who is left out at community meetings? Is it the people who live further away? How can you do outreach to bring them in? Are there people who are socially marginalized within a community, whether for all kinds of reasons, whether it's caste or whatever other social categories are happening at the local level in those communities. It's just being really aware of that and constantly questioning it. You know, whenever you're in communities and looking at who's included and who's excluded and how to bring some of those more excluded people in. And finally, yeah, with people with disabilities, it's you know, similar thing. There's making sure that outreach activities and on all of those participation elements are done in a way that let them participate in terms of meeting their needs around mobility, for example, but also that activities are tailored to their needs. The design document does a nice job of already thinking about some activities and some kind of processing that they could be involved in, and it will depend very much on a person's individual disabilities and what their abilities are. But it's just really thinking very carefully again about, you know, meet their needs and meet them, think about how they can be included, because really I think it is a massive opportunity, and it might take a bit more effort for a lot of these groups to include them, but the potential is huge, and to make sure that they're not excluded. So you know, how do we reach target groups? You know, really the first thing is communication is key. And so you need an effective strategy to make sure that these intended groups, that they're well informed about activities and they're motivated to participate. And so this is where in that first step, this communication needs to really reach all these people and make sure that it's not accidentally excluding some people. And so, for example, also with people with disabilities, it's making sure also that they're carers. It might be women in particular who are caring for children with disabilities. They might have limitations about where and when they can attend, thinking about that. But so the PMU can engage with partners in developing joint communication strategies for these priority groups, and think about the communication channels. There are many different ways and they can be varied depending on more traditional folk media, traditional community groupings, or for some who have access.
We can't see any slides.
Oh no, gosh. I'm so sorry. I've been prattling on this whole time without you seeing. Am I still? Am I not sharing anymore? Oh, I'm so sorry about that. That's not. Okay. Oh, yes, apologies. So this is what I was talking about, and these looking at who and the challenges and the opportunities. I would really encourage everyone to come back to this and think about filling it in, you know, as you go with your specific knowledge of the local areas. So this is where I had got to. We only had missed one slide. And then, yeah, so talking about the different kinds of media channels, for some groups, having things like radio listener clubs or television, text messaging, you know, internet and social media, I think those, depending on the area, have to be careful to make sure that they actually reach those poorer target groups, and you might need different kinds of approaches for them. But, you know, if phone penetration is high, for example, mobile phone use and access, then that's an option. But again, really think about digital approaches can sometimes end up excluding poor women, poor young people, and poor people with disabilities. So I would be careful or just thoughtful about how technology is used, and think about all the ways that digital things can include some people, but maybe exclude others. And this is where having more than one channel can be helpful. And so then, yeah, think about, depending on the media, that it's this combination of tools. Again, radio, community organizations, women's groups. I think you all will already have a lot of good ideas about, in these project areas, what will work. So, and then the next thing is not just that they're included, but that target groups actually benefit. So really, and that's the joint responsibility of project staff, implementing partners and service providers, to make sure that the impact on reducing poverty and strengthening gender equality and empowering women is there. So this is down to everybody. This isn't just, something that someone else should do. So one of the main elements of the targeting and gender strategies used by the project to ensure project engagement with these different target groups. So you have to first outline just what are these strategies to promote, for example, women's empowerment, gender equality, youth engagement, etc. And then explain those implementation procedures. So what are all of the human and financial resources? How are they going to be tracked? What kind of data will there be, especially the sex disaggregated data that's already envisaged for the M&E system? It'll be really important to think about all of that. And then validate the PIM and highlight targeting related activities and implementation. So thinking about the rollout plan, communication and engagement, and then targeting related considerations should be addressed also in stakeholder feedback mechanisms. So having grievance and redress mechanisms, both formal but also more informal, and keeping an eye on what's happening will be important. So in terms of the how, this is the kind of detail that will need to be elaborated a bit more and work through that. I think we won't have time necessarily in this session to go into these main components, but I think you already know them, and they were discussed a bit above already in terms of the mainstreaming themes, and then thinking through the preliminary annual work plan and budget. So now at startup is to really think about how to develop a detailed activity plan and sequence clearly the activities and how they'll be implemented. So really, again, coming back to targeting priority groups, is the resources related to targeting, is it adequate? Will the resources put particularly on the ground? Is that enough to reach all these groups that you want to reach? And if not, what do you need to do? In terms of climate, based on these vulnerabilities that are identified in the CCAP, make sure that the climate finance project approval as a whole, make sure it's, adequate, and does it take the right vulnerabilities into account, and will the progress be measured through output and outcome indicators? For gender, again, is the work plan and budget. Make sure that's linked to this gender strategy and the action plan. So what the details of that gender strategy will be really crucial to making sure that that women are able to participate, and that they can benefit as intended by the project. Same with nutrition, are all of these aspects of nutrition leveraged throughout, for example, incorporating things into the training for women and youth, all of this engagement with the early childhood centers, Anganwadis, is that integrated in a way that also can think about women's care burdens at the same time, really making those links. And then finally, for young people, because that's, again, a major focus, are there financial resources for these activities for young people? And does that include the strategy for their inclusion and their work plan, and capacity building for service providers? This aspect of capacity building is really important for service providers to make sure that they also are thinking about not just including youth or women who are easy to incorporate, but really to make sure that the target groups, these poor women and poor young people, are included. And, that's a challenge, and everyone needs to have their eye on that ball the whole time, and not just go for the low hanging fruit, as it were, but to really to go for those who might otherwise be left behind. So developing an action plan, you know, this is the types of things to start filling in, you know, as you get going. And then the focal points in the PMU, make sure that there's focal points for social inclusion, environment, climate, nutrition. And so on this, there's a lot of resources out there. There's communities of practice, and you know, I think there's a lot both within the region and at headquarters that can we can support on for these mainstreaming themes. And when you get into the more of the details of actually how those are mainstreamed. And so this is just you know, an example of some of the resources that are out there. You know, each of these topics you could spend several days on training, you know, so this is just really the big picture overview. And there's in the notes for the PowerPoint, which will be circulated, there's a link for a startup toolkit as well. So lots of resources there. Yeah, so I'll stop there just to make sure there's some time for questions, or we can go back to anything that anybody wants to raise.
Any questions? Thanks, Emily, for the presentation. Yeah, we have questions.
There is a gender, maximum 60% of gender, women. Then you have included the youth, 35%. But in nutritional column, there is NA. Why so? First. Hello, can you hear me?
Targets for nutrition. Basically, no targets for nutrition.
So if no targets for nutrition, but in Uttarakhand, there is a very diversified biological and climatical condition. Or we are just reading the report of this CNNS, the Comprehensive National Nutritional Survey, and that indicate that more than 60% of women, either it is pregnant woman, adolescent girl, or a lactating mother, these are the nutritional deficiency in vitamin D. Then that is also in zinc, or many types of parameters, which is we are poorly rated. So how we can include these types of local climate resilient or nutritional sufficient crops in our project. So we have just made a detailed studies. Can we show that, madam? Here with DM Almoda, we have made a nutritional grade. We want to make a nutritional grade. So can we align these plates? So nutritional grade for just like we have a crop, and what is the nutritional value of these crops? So we just want to show you the University of Cambridge, we and the Lok Kekraman jointly do the studies, and we want to just show you. So can you please first follow the
There's nothing.
अच्छा
Then what's the point of showing it?
नहीं अच्छा I just want to show you that we have a amla, you know, the citrus fruits. So we have इंग्लिश में नहीं है नहीं इंग्लिश में नहीं बनाया है ये तो हमने अपनी ऑडियंस के लिए बनाया है तो we just नहीं मैं हाँ तो हाँ तो भाई मतलब मैं हिंदी में बोल देता हूँ फिर आप इंग्लिश में बोल तो मैं ये कहता कि जो हमारी एडोलेसेंट गर्ल होगी या हमारा जो लैक्टेटिंग मदर्स हैं प्रेग्नेंट वुमेन्स हैं और जो हमारे चिल्ड्रंस हैं जैसे कि आजकल आप देख रहे हैं कि 19 साल तक के बच्चों में भी डायबिटीज आती है और पहाड़ में भी आती है तो ये क्यों हुआ है बिकॉज ऑफ द न्यूट्रिशन और न्यूट्रिशन हमारा एक बहुत बड़ा मतलब काम करने का एरिया है अगर हम उसको नहीं छू पाए तो फिर प्रोजेक्ट में कहीं ना कहीं हम थोड़ा सा जो है कम तरह आगे जाएंगे तो इस बार अगर हम देखें तो पहाड़ में जैसे आंवला में 10 गुना अधिक है हमारा अमरूद और काफी में 3 गुना अधिक है दूसरी वाली स्लाइड दिखाओ मेरे समझ सॉरी नहीं तो बात दूसरी सेकंड वन उसमें पूरे दिखा ये। अगर हम अनाज की बात करते हैं, मैं थोड़ा सा ये जानना चाहता हूँ, जो हमारा मंडवा है, मंडवा, अगर हम मंडवा में कैल्शियम देखें तो चावल की मात्रा में
ज्यादा।
सेकंड हाँ, चावल से 50 गुना और गेहूं से 10 गुना ज्यादा है। तो क्या हम इसको अपनी न्यूट्रिशनल जो मैं प्लेट बोला था प्रगति होगी, जो मैम जीतू सुहानी ये भी शायद आपसे मैडम ने इसको शेयर किया होगा। तो इसमें हमने क्या किया कि जो हमने पूरे अल्मोड़ा डिस्ट्रिक्ट में जो हम कह रहे थे कि किस तरीके से जो आईसीटीएस हमारा प्रोजेक्ट चल रहा है, उसमें हमने इसको लगाया मैप को, पॉलिसी जो कल बात भी चली थी हमारी, कैसे हम पॉलिसी चेंज कर सकते हैं। तो ये हमने एक वो बनाया है कि इसमें जो हमारे अनाज हैं, जैसे चावल से इसमें 50 गुना है और इसके क्या क्या फायदे हैं। ऐसे ही हमारे पास अगर हम झंगोरा ले लें तो उसमें क्या क्या है, तो रेशा है, लौह तत्व है और अन्य तत्व जो काफी अधिक मात्रा में पाए जाते हैं, उसके क्या क्या फायदे हैं। ऐसे हमारे दालें हैं जिनको हम मिलेट बोल रहे हैं, क्लाइमेट रेजिलेंट क्रॉप्स हैं, जिनको कि हम सीधा जो है प्रोजेक्ट का एक वैल्यू चेन बना सकते हैं, जो पूरा मिलेट्स का हमारा है। दूसरा काला भट्ट है। काला भट्ट में अगर हम देखें तो मूंग, मलका और चना दाल से जो है 1.5 गुना ज्यादा इसमें वो है और ये ब्लड प्रेशर को नियंत्रण करता है, हड्डियों को मजबूत रखता है, मांसपेशियों के विकास में सहायक। नेक्स्ट दूसरा तीसरा ठीक। इसी तरीके से अगर हम देखें भांग बीज में भी जो हमारे छोटे छोटे 3 लोग हैं, हमारा अलसी हो गया।
Please, this is not a session on nutrition. वो ठीक है, वो अपनी जगह है. What is your question to?
हाँ, my question is that कि can we, मतलब मैंने जब I have just seen that कि there is a जो gender, there is youth.
Okay, so there are no targets.
No target for nutrition. So why so?
Okay, why that is the case? Then just I just.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Emily, ma'am, thank you so much. And you mentioned about the women, the marginalized sections, youth, especially youth in the marginalized sections also. So that's a very valid point. I just wanted to add on that certainly whenever we make a plan or we implement some scheme, it happens that we tend to miss these crucial points, that we need to take extra care to ensure that the benefits of these schemes reach the people for whom they have been designed. Actually, in the case of REAP, as I have understood over these 4 years, there is a clear-cut distribution of percentage, like how many ultra poor, 40% would be ultra poor in the beneficiaries, 40% would be poor and 20% would be non-poor households. So the roadmap is clear whom we want to target, but within that also, like within this 40% of ultra poor, we need to see that the sections like scheduled castes and scheduled tribes and PVTGs, they are rightly represented in the project implementation part. That was the point which I took from your presentation. And second is, even among the non-poor households, you mentioned rightly, non-poor, we need to be careful about ensuring that the participation of these marginalized sections and especially the youth. And I would just quote United Nations figures, and they say that at least half of the world's population lives on a daily earning of less than $2 per day. And out of that, 800 million people are those who live on less than $1.25 per day, and two-thirds of the population living in less economic countries like underdeveloping countries belongs to youth. So we need to focus on youth because they have a large portion of the population. And while implementing this project, we need to be very careful that we include the youth not only in the implementation process but also at the planning level process. And then last but not the least, we have to be very careful to ensure the participation of differently abled people, physically disabled or whom we call Divyang in our country. So that was the point which was taken home, that we need to be very careful about involving the all the stakeholders, especially the marginalized sections, the SCs, the STs, the PBTs, the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, the disabled persons, and especially the youth. And gender, the point which my colleague. Ma'am, the gender point which the specialist from REAP wanted to focus upon was that in Uttarakhand state, women they suffer from anemia or malnutrition in large number. He wanted to say that why not include those crops in the nutritional plate. We can focus upon growing more and more these crops which are which promote nutrition and which are very easily available in the Uttarakhand state. So policy focus really on that because nutrition part was there was no target given on nutrition part. That was the point that we need to take care of this aspect. There are several crops which
Wait a second. यहाँ का तो ऑफ कर दीजिए ना जिससे सबको आवाज आ सके
Okay, great. Yeah, just to quickly respond to those 2 points. I mean, thanks so much for both of those points. And although I didn't get all of the richness of the nutrition one, I'm afraid, language-wise. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. You're asking great questions around nutrition and are there ways to integrate it more. I think the thinking around climate sensitive and also nutritious local crops is exactly in the right direction, and so we'll check. I'm new enough to have that. I don't have all the answers in terms of weather and how to incorporate more indicators, but I think there's also just the point of even there's learning from all of this and making sure that all of this thinking around new ways to mainstream and things to do, make sure that that's monitored carefully. And I'm not even talking about, making sure that boxes are ticked, but really just to make sure that I think the project will have so much great learning around these mainstream themes and just think about how to do all of that. And then also this point, you were reminding me of this, around youth and women. Is maybe to just put a challenge out there to everybody to make sure that where women and youth are included, that they're coming across all of the categories, so that you're achieving that 60% of women amongst the ultra poor, the extreme poor, the poor, and the same for the youth. And I think if you can manage that, then it's not just ticking the box on women and excluding them from all of these other categories, but really making sure that thinking about women is integrated and that, because we know people have these different intersecting identities, right? And so, but yeah, obviously just based on these comments, I can see everyone is already thinking in the right ways and asking the right questions. So I know we've gone over a bit time-wise, and you have a very packed agenda. So happy to take more questions, but also understand if you need to move on to your next session.
Yeah, but आपके सवाल का जवाब मिला क्या न्यूट्रिशन वाला? उन्होंने भी दिया कि वो प्रॉपर कर सकते हैं।
If I may just jump in, I'm also thinking with regards to the inclusion of the, locally grown, like nutrient-rich, gender-sensitive and climate-resilient crops, maybe Mira might be able to give us some insight, particularly because you were leading the project on this. And my particular question, and I was also wondering and discussing with Emily earlier, was in terms of ticking off the mainstream themes, like we saw that the project is not nutrition sensitive. So is there any particular reasons for that? So I'm thinking maybe Mira might be able to share some additional insights, for all. Thank you.
From the design is that on gender, the project said that they do not need more interventions for gender transformation because already during the ILSP project, they had worked on those elements and the gender transformative actions were already in place and women were already engaging with men and meeting all the gender mainstream criteria, but also men were engaged and the structural let's say changes in the environment and creating supportive environment for women to be engaged were issues that had been addressed. So there was no need to make it once again a gender transformative project. When the previous project was designed, we did not have the concept of gender transformation. Yet the project took all those actions. So basically, they did not want to continue doing this, and the mission agreed. On nutrition, the discussion I recall is even though the statistics are not very, not very favorable, but the government of Uttarakhand, their view was the team that was involved in the design. Their view was that the government already has a lot of programs and schemes working on nutrition and improvement of nutrition of children and mothers and women and adolescents and all that. So they said that we are not keen to have this project do more of what the state government is already doing. So you can converge with those schemes. And I can speak also from the experience of the previous project, which was not ticked for nutrition, but they were working on promoting certain kinds of foods and also delivering, nutritious values to the government sectors where children and lactating mothers come, the Anganwadi centers. So we agreed that we will not take it for that. Which is not, essentially, the thinking was that one was already covered and the second is being covered by the government. So we can supplement. For example, a number of the cooperative societies here are collecting and delivering take-home rations that include millets for all households, all poor households. So those steps were already being taken and we did not need to add. So that's on why we did not take it for nutrition and gender transformation. Does that answer your question, Sherry?
Thanks, Mira.
Okay.
Yes, no, that was really insightful. Thanks for that.
All right. So
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. I think it's so much richer than it did in coming out in the project design, and it's really fantastic to see the lessons that are coming out, over the learning that you'll be even adding, in this building on what's already been achieved.
right. So do we have another presentation from you, Seven?
No, I think that's it in terms of presentation and discussion on the social inclusion themes from our side.
Okay. Okay. So anything else from the group here? Nothing? That's it then. Thanks a lot for making the time, and we'll stay in touch and sharing if you are in India on a mission or Emily, then maybe good to visit a couple of the projects, also understand what they are doing on the various mainstream things. Yeah?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank everyone, especially Emily, for really coming on board and giving us a very good and comprehensive, presentation and discussion, on targeting gender and other social inclusion themes. And thank you so much for raising very important and pertinent questions, and as Emily rightly pointed out, we're all thinking on the same line, and that's really good to see, especially because we're embarking on this very important journey for Uttarakhand. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope we'll get to meet soon one day. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Share the PowerPoint slides and email it to you after the session. Thanks a lot.
Right. Okay. Thank you and good luck.
Everyone, it was a real pleasure. Have a good evening.
So we switch to anything else. Session to lunch. Okay.
No, we don't need the USRLM team for the financial management. It's primarily for the project staff, the DPMs and the PMU staff. Acha, that's true, yeah.
So yeah, tomorrow we will all meet again, and tomorrow we'll be winding up our lunch. Lunch का कल आप free हो जाएंगे. फिर मुझे लगता है आपने जब मंडे तक ही पहुंची थी, सैटरडे संडे एंजॉय करके. यहाँ सरस भी लगा हुआ है, यहाँ विरासत भी लगा हुआ है, तो आप सब जा सकते हैं. हमारी यहाँ में आपके समूह ही सारे प्रदेश के जो कंट्री डिस्प्लेस कर रहे हैं, तो आप जाकर देखिए कैसा अच्छा परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं. एंड आई एम श्योर सरस क्योंकि इंडियन फेस पे तो DMMs और DPMs जाके ये भी देख सकते हैं कि एक्चुअली हमारा कितना अच्छा रेवेन्यू कुछ इलेक्शन हुआ होगा सरस में देहरादून में या नहीं. So that will also be a good kind of knowledge gathering and information gathering for us. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank for you for your puja. अच्छा तो आप बताइए कब जाना चाहिए हम लोग तो चलिए. अच्छा कितना है घूमने के लिए?